Hi, this is Steve Floriston. This is Unit 11, Assess Coexisting Needs, and Unit 12, Respond to Client Needs. These two units have been clustered together so that the notes and the assessments cover both units. These are the parts of the two units: screening and assessment, developing a relationship, addressing the need, documenting evaluation, and then the nature and the impact of the needs. When we look at coexisting needs, this is where a person has more than one condition at the same time. So a mental illness as well as a physical illness, or a mental illness and a substance abuse condition, something like that. These conditions are quite common, and it's part of the reason for this is because that at key transition points in a young person's life, they just have a lack of family and social support. So that might be when they're going to school for the first time, or when they're leaving school and going to work. But these key transition points, they just do not have the support. An example of this is rates of mental illness are high for people with alcohol and drug abuse, physical disability, brain injury, problematic gambling, homelessness, and multiple health problems. And so these are what we see as coexisting needs, coexisting conditions. To meet the needs of young people with these coexisting conditions, the first step is screening and assessment, then addressing the needs, documenting, and then evaluating. So what's screening and assessment exactly? Screening evaluates the possible presence of a need or a condition. An assessment tells us what is that actually like, what's the nature of the need, how big is it, etc. Your organisation is likely to have policies or procedures about screening students who come into the residence initially, or screening later on if a need develops. And it will also have policies or procedures about your role. Does it include screening and assessment of students? So house parents are limited in what assessments they can actually carry out, and it's pretty important that we don't overstep our role. Some assessment procedures require qualified and experienced people, and some even require that a person is licensed. I should just mention that these images are from a recent trip that we did to look at boarding residences in Melbourne and in New Zealand. There's a lot of existing information that we can use to screen students, and these are things like student application, enrolment processes, health records, incident reports, running records, staff notes, stuff from previous schools, health records, parent guardian communication, notes from that sort of thing, and any other sort of school records. So screening is these sort of things. It can be an interview, with structured questions, or just a casual interview. It might be observing a person. It might be completing a questionnaire. They can be quite formal. Screening can be quite formal, or it can be just observing students and seeing if there are particular needs. Screening can include a standardised document, and this includes consistency across different agencies if people are using standardised documents. And this can also be used to work out if a person should be receiving a particular benefit from the government. So you need to work out if there's people in your organisation that can help with screening, or services professional agencies outside your organisation that help with screening as well. Informed consent. The young person should know all about the assessment before the assessment takes place, and that is things like the expectations of the process. What sort of tools, what sort of questionnaires are going to be used, just explaining if you're following a standard process that all students go through, or if this is a special assessment because of their presenting need, what the results of the assessment process might be, how you'll communicate that to the student, the impact of the results and possible response to the needs, all of those sort of things. We need to consider trauma and trauma history even before the assessment begins, and trauma includes early childhood physical, sexual, emotional abuse, interpersonal violence, traumatic experiences. Might have been something like a car accident, any sort of trauma that the young person might have gone through. And these can include the generational trauma that you sometimes find with refugees, immigrant populations, and sometimes also with Indigenous young people. So what happens is that a student may not feel safe in an interview situation. They may not trust the person asking the questions, and the guardedness might look like resistance or denial or just poor behaviour, when really it is a response to the trauma that this young person has experienced. So we need to consider that at the outset. We also need to consider safety, of course, any health risks at all to the young person. So that's health, any dangers that the young person could suffer because of their health, any sort of behaviour, violent behaviour, self-injurious behaviour. So this is behaviour towards other people and also towards themselves. So we need to consider this and make sure that we prepare for this and take action to prevent anything that could happen to the young person. The whole purpose of the screening and assessment is to gather this comprehensive information, a fairly comprehensive understanding of the young person, and to develop a individualised care plan for the young person. So some do's and don'ts. The screening and assessment is about getting to know a young person, and so we shouldn't rely on tools alone. We should rely on our own experience and judgment and that as well. We should make every effort to contact all involved parties, including family members, people who've treated the student before, etc. Don't allow preconceptions about issues to interfere with what a young person really needs. So, we might have a very negative attitude towards substance abuse, but we just need to set that aside for a moment while we're doing the best that we can for this young person. Don't assume that there is one correct support approach or program for meeting any type of need. The purpose of the assessment is to gather information so that we can have the most effective support program for the young person. Know the specific role that your residents, people in your residence, people in your organisation can provide in this process. Don't be afraid to admit when you don't know something, either to the young person or to yourself, but you can indicate that you'll work to find the answers, ask for help, etc. Empathy and hope are the most valuable components of your work with a young person. We can support a young person as they're going through assessment. So this is, we might be supporting them by helping them or assisting them in some way ourselves, or we might be supporting them as they are helped by another person in our organisation or by an external provider or agency. So we can just monitor the student and address needs as they arise, explain options and listen to their preferences or concerns, transport students to appointments, maintain contact with professionals and agencies who are supporting the student, maintain contact with the school and helping address their needs in the school, maintain contact with the family, just be available to talk to the student, to encourage and motivate the student, and possibly also help with medication where that is a part of the support for the young person. It might also be necessary to work with the student to change the support that they're getting or to change aspects of it. So we want to have a look at an actual tool, and this Headspace psychosocial assessment for young people is a great tool. It's a great example. This is what it looks like, and the first part of it is really important: tips for engaging and interviewing, and so it's good to read through that. It's very useful instruction for using this tool, and then the importance of the interviewer, their belief system and their assumptions. So we just need to be very careful about that. So it's a very good part of that to read through. This has 10 domains. You can see the domains there, and we'll have a look at a couple of those domains. There's another section here that's important to read on confidentiality. So it's important to read and understand that. So here's the domain here, home and environment. And you can see that there is an initial screening question, or initial, so there's three actually. And then there are examples of more probing questions, or these would be more assessment type questions. So if the screening questions bring up a need, then we can go on and use these other questions to find out the actual nature of that need. You can see another one here on education and employment, and also in there it has this social and occupational functioning assessment scale, so you can locate a student onto this scale. It's very useful. So let's have a look at boundaries, because boundaries are a part of making sure that we've got a very good foundation for doing this screening and assessment and addressing the students' needs. And we've talked a lot about boundaries in previous units, particularly in Unit 2. But there are just a couple of boundaries here that we need to have a look at. One of these is over-involvement, becoming overly attached to the young person, showing exceptional behaviour towards the young person, being emotionally entangled with the young person. Another is accepting gifts or having some sort of financial arrangement, such as buying or selling from a young person. Another is the disclosure of personal information, including excessive self-disclosure, by the person who is the interviewer or by the boarding supervisor. Another might be a dual relationship, considering the client to be a friend, or even allowing the young person to think, I'm a friend more than this is a professional relationship. Another, of course, is touch when it's not essential to the job. So we just need to be careful about those boundaries, and also remembering those boundaries from Unit 2. So in developing a relationship with the young person, it's really important that we look at these things. And the first is this rapport, a sense of connection, in order for the young person to trust that they've been heard and their interests will be well represented. So just taking a genuine interest, to listen, to be focused, to be informed, to show empathy. Purpose. You need to be very clear with the young person about the purpose of this screening and assessment and addressing their needs. Why are we doing this? What's going to happen next? That sort of thing. Then control. Who controls this process? What control does the young person have? What do they not have? Then strengths. Talking about the young person's strengths and supports and how to use them. Just minimising unnecessary repetition of their story. Being sensitive to any special needs that the young person might have. And this is particularly young people with disabilities. And then to ensure that the engagement is culturally appropriate. In doing all of this, it's very important that the supervisor has very effective communication skills, and they should try to develop these skills, refine these skills, because it's probably one of the most important tools that they've got in being able to help young people. It's really important to empower young people through this whole process, because a lot of these young people have been marginalised, and we don't want this process to do the same to them. So we want to listen to young people and facilitate genuine engagement in planning. So they need to be involved in understanding and planning their own support to meet their needs. Don't reinforce their experience of being marginalised or disempowered. And we know that case planning is most effective when the young person is directly involved in it and can direct it to some extent. They're much more likely to follow the plan if they are involved. Our support should be person-centred, so identifying and acknowledging the person's point of view, finding out what the person wants. Is it the same as what others want? Like their family, their friends, their school. Identifying affirming the person's strengths, competencies, interests, etc. Keeping the big picture in mind, but just looking out for those small steps. Remembering that the student is not the problem, and separate the student from the problem or from the issue or the need. Just be aware and beware of other people's evaluation. Commit to the student and the process, and they're more likely to be committed as well. So when we address the need, there's lots of steps in this process, and I want to just run through these very quickly. A lot of these are common sense, logical sort of steps. So initially we have this screening that a need exists, and as we've said before, that might be something that you've observed when the students first arrive, or it might be something that you observe later. Somebody might talk to you about it, whatever, but the need is identified. Then you provide information to the young person and to all the stakeholders about the screening and assessment process. You select a way of doing the assessment, and you do this in collaboration with the young person and appropriate professionals. You carry out the assessment process, or you refer the student to a professional or an agency to carry out this assessment. And the result of that is that we then have a lot more information about the young person's needs. We communicate the results of the assessment to the young person and other stakeholders, like parents. We collaborate with the appropriate people who can identify the most effective supports to meet the need. So we look at this need, and then we collaborate in order to work out what are the different supports that could meet this need, and then what will be most effective for this young person. And ideally the young person would be involved in that as well. And then you provide the supports to meet the young person's needs, and generally they are one of three things. You either support the student yourself, you refer the student on to another person in your school or residence who can meet their needs, you refer the student onto a professional or an agency or service outside the residence that has the relevant skills, qualification and acceptance. So we then continue to monitor and support the student, and we've talked about ways we can do that. We empower the student to make decisions themselves, and then we evaluate the support, communicate with the student, and we can make changes if necessary, or we can conclude the support. There's a few things to consider when we're choosing specialists, and also you might consider that some of these things if you're using another person in your residence, so, or in your organisation. So, for example, you might have a educational psychologist or counsellor in the school, and you're thinking, I could use that person. Well, you need to consider some things before you do that. So has the person been involved with the student previously? What is the student's preference? What's the parent's preference? What sort of training and experience does this person have? What is their general reputation for achieving result? Do they work well with young people? Not all professionals do. Do they communicate effectively with young people? Have they got access to a hospital or clinic as required? What's the cost of this service and who's going to pay it? And will they use a strength-based process? A positive strength-based process or approach. Collaboration is really important, and we know that we can achieve the best results for the young person if we collaborate with others, work with others, and try and ensure that we're using the skills and the knowledge of a range of people to get the most effective support for the young person. At some stage, the support is going to need to conclude, and we call this exiting. And why would this happen? It would happen because the goals have been achieved. There's no longer a need for support, so the needs are no longer evident. That's the best way to exit, of course. Another way, which is not the best, is where the student refuses to be involved, or the parent requests that the student is withdrawn from the program. The needs are not being met by the support program, and there's no benefit in continuing it. The needs are different to what was identified by the screening and assessment, so the needs were not substantiated. It's become apparent that the residence does not have the capacity to meet the students' needs and that they would be better served elsewhere. Risk levels have increased to the extent that the support program cannot continue. So that's maybe if a young person is severely depressed, then we would possibly stop the support program and implement some other program. The student moves away from the residence. So these sort of exiting processes, they can look quite different, So, for example, the student might just stop the support. The student might be asked to leave the residence, suspended or expelled from the residence. The student might be assisted to move to a different facility that has better capacity to help them. So there's a whole range of different ways that the student might exit. As a student exits these supports, we just need to be a little bit sensitive to their needs, because this can be difficult for some young people. This whole process of exiting from something that they have felt quite comfortable with, possibly. All right, let's talk a little bit about documents. We want our documents to be secure for these reasons, so they don't become lost or destroyed, so that we can readily access them as required. So they can only be accessed by people who have got permission to access them and reason to access them, so that they can be maintained and updated appropriately. So how do we do that? If it's a physical document like a paper or a file or something, then it must be in a secure, locked cabinet, a secure place. We must have a backup, so you might scan that and back that up onto a computer or a hard drive or something. If your documents are digital, and these days most documents are digital, or many documents are digital, well, what you would do is you would save them onto a drive that is password protected, and you would also save them onto something else, so that if your drive goes down or your computer goes down, you do not lose these documents. So the most common thing these days is to use an external hard drive or a cloud-based arrangement where these are saved off-site. We need to be very careful about sharing information, and we need to have the correct permissions in place before we share information. So what does that look like? Typically, if you were going to share information with a professional or an agency, then you would have permission from the student themselves, their parent, your organisation, that sort of thing. So you need to make sure these permissions are in place before you share information. At the conclusion of the support process for the young person, so the screening, assessment and support, we need to evaluate how this is going. And this would actually occur not only at the conclusion but during the whole process itself. So you would be looking for things like positive changes in the student's condition or need areas, or even negative changes. If the young person is, if these needs are becoming greater, then that is an indication that what you're doing is not really working, or it may need to be changed. Student feedback, this could just be their demeanour, what you observe. It could be questions, it could be an interview thing. Post-screening and assessment tools, so that you use similar tools that you used at the start, at the end. Specialist interviews or agency interviews that have been supporting the young person, and a case management review. Any of these things are part of the whole evaluation process. So we need to evaluate, has this worked for the young person? Where do we go from here? Do they need to have this continuing? Do they need to have a different sort of support? What do they need? So the evaluation is a very important part of the process. The last part of this is just looking at different needs for young people, presenting issues and needs for young people. And these, the ones that we look at in depth are health, mental health, disability, relationships, alcohol and other drugs, imprisonment. So this generally, most often, is the imprisonment of a parent or a carer. Sometimes it can also be the imprisonment of a young person themselves, child abuse, family violence, homelessness, and again, the homelessness is often the carer, the parent, and so they are homeless because their parent is homeless. I'd encourage you to read these because there's a lot of information in there. For example, with homelessness, it is different to rooflessness, and so what is the difference there? What is the effect on the young person? Those sort of things. Poverty, poverty has significant effects for young people. Age. Now, what we mean here is the age of the parents, and these days a lot of parents are older, a lot of carers are older than they used to be, and there are some effects for young people of this. Behaviours of concern and employment, and again this is the employment of the carers or the parents of the young person. So assessment 26 asks for these two things. What is the effect of these needs or these issues on the young person, and what are the referral options for your organisation for those presenting needs? Thank you very much.